April 17, 1994. Jacksonville, Florida. A young woman, just 20 years old and pregnant, is found brutally murdered. For decades, her killer remained a mystery, haunting her family and frustrating detectives. But now, over 30 years later, the truth has finally come to light. And it all points to one man who was a guest at the deceased wedding. His arrest shook the community. Tina Heins was just 20 years old. In April of 1994, she lived in Jacksonville, Florida, in a Mayport apartment she shared with her husband, Jeremy Heins, and Jeremy's brother, Chad Heins. Jeremy was serving in the U.S. Navy, and the night Tina was killed, he was away on duty. As at that time 19-year-old Chad, who had recently moved to Jacksonville and was staying with his sister-in-law, slept on the living room sofa. He woke up around 5:45 a.m. to find 3 small fires burning in the living room and kitchen, one on the very sofa where he slept. After putting out the fires and disarming the smoke alarm, he discovered Tina Heins in her bedroom. She had been stabbed multiple times, where he found Tina lying in a pool of blood. He immediately called the police. Tina's life was full of plans and promise. Though young, she was expecting a child. She was 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. Born on February 27, 1974 in her hometown in Wisconsin. Tina had a close, loving family. She and her brother had grown up playing together. She loved spending time with children, helping out, and being there for family. Her friends remembered her kindness, her joy in simple things: movies, shopping, laughter. Back in Jacksonville, she navigated life with hopes and challenges, balancing the demands of being a military wife, a young mother-to-be, and a person building her life far from home. The night of her murder was meant to be like many others for Tina, quiet, maybe lonely, but peaceful. Instead, it became the night her world was forever broken. The crime scene was horrific. Investigators determined Tina had been stabbed more than 24 times, 27 wounds in total. Her body bore signs of sexual assault as well. But even amid the violence, investigators looked for clues. The apartment showed no clear signs of forced entry, raising suspicion that the killer either had a key, was let in, or found another way in quietly. DNA evidence was collected from Tina's body, from under her fingernails, and from bodily fluids on her sheet. At the time, the technology existed to record the profile, but no one in the database matched it. Chad Heins initially became the prime suspect. In 1996, he was convicted and sent to prison for Tina's murder. But over the years, doubts emerged. The DNA evidence never matched him. In the build-up to the investigation, there was no evidence implicating Chad Heins in the murder. No blood on his clothes or under his fingernails, no scratches or scrapes on his body, and no murder weapon found. A forensic analyst testified that DNA testing performed before Heins' trial on 3 hairs collected from the victim's bedroom showed that the hairs came from one person. And that person wasn't Chad or Jeremy Heins. The testimony was faulty, however, because the analyst failed to give statistics for the percent of the population that would match the hairs. There was strong evidence that Chad had a sleep disorder and was very difficult to rouse, especially after he had been drinking, as he had been on the night of the crime. Eventually, his conviction was vacated, and he was released after about 11 years behind bars when the scientific record cleared him. Imagine the rift he must have had with his brother overly allegedly killing his sister-in-law, only to be proven innocent of the crime after 11 years behind bar. The discovery of Tina's apartment, the collection of DNA and physical evidence, and the early conviction of a family member set the stage for decades of mystery. The crime scene spoke in silent, brutal detail, but the killer's identity remained hidden. That morning wasn't just the start of a murder investigation. It was the beginning of a story that would span 3 decades, miscarriages of justice, scientific breakthroughs, and a family's unceasing cry for truth. Over the years, the investigation into Tina Heins' murder hovered in darkness. But cracks began to show, small leads, new science, and stubborn detectives refusing to let the case die. Tina wasn't just another victim of violence, she was a bright young woman whose life was brimming with relationships, hopes, and love. Her loss left a void felt across 2 states, in both Jacksonville and her family's hometown in Wisconsin. Over the years, her community in Wisconsin refused to let her memory fade. Her family established the Tina Livernash Memorial Scholarship, helping students in her name and keeping alive her spirit of giving and hope. Even after the clouds of accusation and the years of silence, her family's faith held firm. They waited for truth to emerge, held tight to the belief that her name would someday be cleared, not just for justice but for her dignity. When Michael Ziegler was finally arrested, the emotional release was overwhelming. For the family, it wasn't simply a case being solved, it was Tina's story being honored. After 31 years, they got a chance to see her name returned to innocence. This part of the story reminds us, behind every cold case are people who loved, who mourned, and who demanded justice. Tina's memory mattered every single day her case slept in silence. After decades of unanswered questions, the wheels of justice finally turned for Tina Heins' case. On August 28, 2025, a grand jury indicted Michael Ziegler on charges of first-degree murder and attempted sexual battery in connection with Tina's 1994 stabbing death. Less than a week later, on September 4, 2025, Ziegler was arrested in Covington, Georgia, more than 300 miles away from Jacksonville. He was extradited back to Jacksonville and held at the Duval County Jail. Authorities said that Ziegler had been a close friend of Tina's husband, Jeremy Heins, and even stood next to the couple on their wedding day, meaning he had previously enjoyed trust and proximity. His relationship with the Heins family added an unsettling twist to the case. During press conferences, law enforcement described how advanced forensic genetic genealogy had unlocked the cold case, turning once silent DNA evidence into a lead that traced back to Ziegler. Prosecutors asserted that the DNA obtained from the scene and from Tina's body, including under her fingernails, matched the newly constructed profile tied to Ziegler. However, prosecutors have emphasized that Ziegler had been a person of interest from the genealogical leads and that his proximity to the victim and access to the home, as a friend of Jeremy, were considered part of the context for suspicion. Once the trial begins, the DNA match and the relational ties may be the central evidence. For now, Ziegler is being held without bail, facing the possibility of life in prison if convicted. For the Heins family, this is a moment of bitter relief. After more than 30 years, the man accused of taking Tina's life is no longer a shadow. But not yet a verdict. They still await the day when the courtroom will pronounce guilt or innocence. Tap that like button, subscribe now, and never miss a story.